Well, that was quite a morning. You know, I am not going to stand here and pretend to be a scientist or a nutritionist or a dietitian. I can pronounce triglyceride. I'm pretty good at anthocyanin, but half the crap on the side of the box, I don't have a sweet clue how to say it. So I guess it falls to me to share with you perhaps a pragmatic perspective on everything that we're here today. And I know what drew me here in particular today is this intersection between cooking and nutrition, between being a professional cook and understanding nutrition and the role that it plays in our lives as professional cooks. And of course, what better place to examine that than here at George Brown College, one of the single best cooking schools on the planet. It just makes sense. And it is a particular passion of mine. It is something that I've thought about many, many times over the years. This whole issue of how do we get cooks excited about nutrition. Professional cooks, student cooks, young cooks, chefs, and in particular, home cooks. Mom and dad, whoever's doing the food at home. Because not to put too fine a point on it, I agree with much of what I heard this morning. I gotta say, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, I have learned a lot today. I absolutely have. At the same time, maybe I'm still a little bit confused about some things. And if I'm confused, well, I certainly worry about the greater world out there. And again, mom and dad, and are they confused or not? Because frankly, it's one thing to come together in a room like this and say a lot of those words and look at a lot of those mind-numbing slides. But it's our job, every one of us in this room, to absorb what you see, to understand what we see, and then to take it to our sphere of influence. And that's why we came together today in the first place. So I'm going to try and put perhaps more of a pragmatic perspective on everything we just heard. And for me, it all really began about 15 years ago when the world's toughest food critic moved into my house. And he's 15 years old. He lives just down the hall. Great kid, my son Gabe. And like so many of you, becoming a parent changed me. I'm not making any claims to, superstardom or anything at all. When we become parents, we change. We grow up. We smarten up. We start to realize what really matters in this life. And for me, in that position 15 years ago, I thought it was all about me. I mean, I already had a few books under my belt. I already had a couple of, hit Food Network shows on and had already run one of the top restaurants in the country. Clearly, I knew a thing or two about food. And then my son was born, and I had to wake up and realize I didn't know a damn thing about food. I knew a lot about how to charge a lot of money for a little bit of food. I had that down. But I didn't truly understand food. And I certainly didn't understand how it fits into society. And I certainly didn't understand how we're ripped off every single day by Big Food Inc. None of that I had stumbled onto yet. But as all of you who are parents know, we start to cook for our kids. We start to take food seriously. Or at least I hope that you start to take food seriously, because I know I did. And becoming responsible for another human being's health and welfare, being a part of making them the best they can be, I can't think of anything else to make me a better cook than that. And it certainly did wake me up. And as I said, I almost overnight had to wake up and realize that food is screwed in North America. We are so taken advantage of each and every day. There is just so much that is wrong about this food system of ours. And it's not unique to the U.S. We share many values with the U.S. We do get much of our food system, I think, perhaps a little better than the folks to the south. But let's not beat around the bush. We still have walking around with us lots and lots of folks that need some help, need to understand what's going on. And why is it that we've created this food system that externalizes its costs? Its true costs are not born in our food system. You can forgive single mom for standing at the cash register and filling up her cart and looking at that piece of paper and the big number down at the bottom and thinking, well, that's what food costs today. But it's not, especially when that cart is full of processed food. And that's really much of the lens that I'm looking through today is the role that processed food has begun to play in our society. It's played for many, many years. Because when that cart is full of processed food, the true cost of what's in that cart is not held at the supermarket. It's held in our healthcare system. And one of these days, our politicians are going to wake up and realize that we need to be far more proactive than we are reactive right now. And the way our healthcare system is set up and the big special interests and all the things that sort of underlie that healthcare system, there's a lot of momentum there. It's very hard to get around that momentum when you're a politician held hostage by a short-term political system. But at least here in Canada, we've got universal health care. We don't have to argue about that. We understand how important that is. We understand how easy that is to integrate into our society. And sure, okay, now and then you or somebody you know waits for something, big deal. We got the best damn health care in the world. And we're lucky to all have it and not to have to go through this ridiculous debate that's going on to the south of us on whether, as a society, we should take care of each other or not. Think about it. We're lucky. It is the best country in the world. I'm just saying. So, how did this all happen? You know, I find it fascinating to listen to the whys. You know, I'm interested in the hows, though. Where did this come from? What is it that underlies all of this? And I've been particularly fascinated by, for many, many years, by this gap between civilization and evolution in particular. And that's part of what we're here to talk about a little bit. So I'm just curious, first of all, how many of you here are student chefs? Just curious. How many student chefs do we have in the room? Interesting, eh? How many dietitians, nutritionists, that sort of folks? Awesome. I sure wish there were more students here, though. I'm curious, too. Raise your hand if you have a tongue. Got a tongue? Everybody got a tongue? Awesome. Good to know. Now, raise your hand if you use that tongue to perceive flavor. Trick question. Wrong. Your tongue does not perceive flavor. It's only good at perceiving taste. And we're going to talk about that. It's important to understand. But perhaps more importantly, raise your hand if you're a caveman. Well, my hand's up. And ladies and gentlemen, every single one of you in this room is a caveman. And I know that's not a gender-neutral term. I couldn't quite figure out a gender-neutral caveman term. Forgive me, ladies. But this is hypothesis. Would this be a hypothesis? I'm not sure. I'm not a scientist. I don't understand the semantics of that word. But I believe that we're all cavemen, every single one of us. And it's pretty straightforward to understand why. I mean, we are not that different from the people that were running around the woods looking for roots and berries just 100 years ago, 200, 500, 1,000 years ago. We're the same people. Evolution can't keep up with civilization. So let's think about that, because first of all, let's consider that tongue. I mean, in this day and age, we think that tongue is all about taste and flavor, and it's all about celebrity chefs. It's so easy to drink that Kool-Aid, eh? You know, and to believe that human beings evolved tongues over millions and millions of years so that you could taste all that food that guys like me prepare. It's all about me. In the restaurant, it's all about me, right? It's the restaurant. It's celebrity chef. Bullshit, frankly. You know, it's all, you know, we've got those tongues so that we can, you know, taste that particular organic ingredient harvested by the light of the moon on the north side of the tree by the one-armed man in the middle of the night. You know, like, no. We have tongues because our environment is dangerous. And I'm not talking about, you know, saber-toothed tigers, crazed chefs, and Donald Trump. I'm talking about the environment that we evolved in over tens of thousands of millennia, truly. And we're still those same people. We've got tongues to perceive danger. That's why, and every cooking school student has been through this, you stick your tongue out, you can still taste sugar. You can still taste when something is sweet, and your tongue is literally outside of your body. Now, why would that be? Because in nature, things that are sweet are things that are full of carbohydrates, and without carbohydrates, we don't have energy. That is one of the fundamental things of life. We need energy, and that's where we get it, from things that are sweet. But what if that thing is dangerous? We don't want to bring it all the way into our body. We don't want to commit. We don't want to start chewing, so we taste it tentatively. And that's why we can perceive sweet outside of ourselves. It's also why we can perceive bitter. Bitter signifies toxins in nature. of course, I'm forced to generalize. I'm only here for a moment, and there's going to be all kinds of examples of things that are bitter that aren't toxic, but in general, in nature, when something's bitter, there are toxins present. Don't put it in your body. That's really what it comes down to. So, as I think about all this, and here we are all these years later, I mean, we know that when we get a cold, we know we can't taste very well. We know that something's different, something's off. We've all tried that experiment where you pinch your nose and you taste something, and then you release your nose, and all of a sudden it blooms, it opens up, and flavors arrive. And that's because flavor is the combination of taste, texture, temperature, mouthfeel, a number of different things. Taste is what we're thinking about, though. So as human beings, as cavemen, oh, and I've even got slides. Right, I forgot I got slides. Let's see here. Let's see. Slides. Oh, hey, how did we get here? Where are we going? Embrace your inner caveman. Yes, some slides. Yeah. Which is why honey, of course, has so much flavor, but it's just sweet. It's all about that tongue, right? I should pay attention to my own slides, shouldn't I? So, this is also, chefs that don't really understand this are prone to doing silly things like, taking a chocolate truffle and rolling it in bitter cocoa powder. And then we take that truffle, and the first thing you do when you bring any food near your mouth is you inhale. We all do it. It's part of us. It's physiological. So you inhale that bitter cocoa powder, and you can always tell a dialed-in pastry chef because they understand it's not necessarily a good idea for your guests to be inhaling bitter powders, at the start of an eating experience. It's, you see this. People cough, okay? So think it through. And really, all I'm trying to do is remind you of some things that you already know and point out that underlying the reason we know these things is because we are caveman. We are truly still the same exact people that were running around 1,000 years ago. So what else has that left us with? What are some of the other ripple effects of that one central thought? Well, let's get serious for a moment. Do you know that we now have more overweight people on this planet than underweight? More overweight than underweight. But that we have most North Americans that are overweight are simultaneously malnourished. How can that be? How does that add up? Well, we're learning lots about that today. Certainly some of those answers we've heard already today, how that can align. But really, it comes back to the fact that we're cavemen. We are hardwired to crave the things that we need. The things that we need to thrive, the things we need to sustain ourselves, to grow big and strong. We will go great lengths for sweet in particular. It's in us. We learned long ago how to take that sweetness and store it in the form of energy for the future. That's just part of what makes up human beings. We have that ability to absorb energy and store it for the future. So, sweet, sure, man, we can't get enough of this stuff. Protein, fundamental building block of life, another crave, can't live without it. Fortunately, it's easily found in the most widely planted crops on earth, i.e. grains and legumes, the things that meat eat. We need to eat more of the things that meat eat. Because what's happened, we flash forward today, in essence, meat is concentrated protein, and that used to be an unattainable luxury. You used to be lucky if you could gather together with a few other hunters and maybe get some meat on the table, or maybe raise a pig or a cow and kill it once a year. And we evolved with those cravings. It's in us, and that ability to go and work hard to do the things that it takes to put that food on the plate. It's in us. And so flash forward to today, and setting aside this ridiculous debate about food expenses rising, we are overwhelmed with food. More food than has ever been available to human beings in history. But we're still cavemen. We still have innate cravings that we cannot subvert, that we cannot set aside, that we can only manifest. And then we look around at all this plentiful, cheap, inexpensive calories surrounding us this liquid torrent of sugar that Big Food Inc. is pointing at us, it's no wonder that we take in as much as we possibly can. It's because we're hardwired to be that way. It's just the way it is. That Big Food Inc. liquid sugar pipeline, though, that's really what this is all about. All of those lawyers and scientists sitting at Big Food Inc.'s table. There's no chefs there. There's no cooks there. That boardroom table is full of all kinds of ethically dubious people trying to force all kinds of crap down our throats. Many of you read that book a couple of years ago, Fat, Sugar, Salt. Fascinating book, and it confirmed for me something that I suspected for a long time. Because when I started to sort of dial in and understand the true things that are going on in the world of food, I started to wonder, well, what do these people feed themselves and their own families? Like, where's the ethics in this situation? Why is it that we have investments in these companies that are killing North Americans? Why are these companies allowed to exist in the first place? Why don't we have these sugar taxes? Why aren't we doing the simple, basic things that economists suggest we do? Why is the solution so blatantly obvious, staring us in the face, but we do nothing about it? Well, largely because of short-term politics and because we are cavemen. Okay, let's see if I can keep this analogy going here, shall we? So, here's another thing to consider, being a caveman. We have a very interesting contradiction in our midst. Raise your hand if you watch more food than you cook. What the heck is going on? We as a culture have an absolute infatuation with food in all forms of media, across the board. We've got basically cookbooks propping up the publishing industry. They tell me there's two types of books that are profitable today: cookbooks, romance novels, like 50 Shades of Braise, right? That's all you get. And we've got every form of social media known to man featuring food, and all of us, Instagramming our food shots, get the perfect light, the perfect, hold it up just the right way. Food media. We've got websites, blogs, magazines. We've got now 2 entire television networks devoted to food and cooking in North America. Amazing. At the same time, though, less of us than ever before are actually cooking food. By some estimates, we're now on our 3rd generation of Canadians growing up in homes with no living memory of what it is to truly cook food. With mom and dad believing the hype, drinking the Kool-Aid, feeling like they're so busy being busy that there's no time to be human beings. And so we don't cook anymore. And this pervasive myth has started to creep into our culture that somehow cooking is high-order stuff, that it's difficult, that it takes tools and techniques and training to be just a simple home cook. And then, worse yet, we've got this media culture that's constantly chasing a story with no regard for being part of the public discourse. They're just trying to sell advertising with something big and fancy and splashy, which leads us to the great cauliflower crisis of 2015. Bullshit. Food, we spend less money than ever before in the history of mankind on food now, today, in Canada. Less than in the history of human beings. We used to have to work our asses off to get food on the table. We'd have to work the entire week to get shelter and food. Now we're done by Monday around noon? Okay? Food is less expensive than it has ever before been in human history by every possible metric. So when the media wants to call me up and talk about the latest expensive food, this, that, and the other, I'm like, no, I won't do it. It's just buying into the hype. It's not an argument for why we can't cook for ourselves. It's not. By comparison, maybe the cauliflower is more expensive today than it was last year, so buy broccoli or buy something else. And tell the media to shut up when they're on that. And so here we are all these years in, And I found myself, it's been a few years, I found myself sitting at a boardroom table once up at Food Network headquarters, and somebody let it slip that the number one reason people visited foodnetwork.ca was to find my recipes. I thought that was pretty cool. I took that as a, badge of honor. Thought that was pretty amazing. And then we discussed it further and discovered that really less than 20% of the folks that watch a show on Food Network will actually turn that into action, actually turn around and go cook. Less than 20%. How do you reconcile that? What's going on? More forms of food media than ever before in history, less of us actually cooking than ever before in history. They absolutely correlate. It's quite simple. We're cavemen. It's in us. And when we don't cook, when we don't come together around food, when we don't do the things that are just a part of our basic humanity, well, then we just get the vicarious thrill. We go watch Food Network. You watch guys like me cooking for my kid. And by the way, if you watch Gabe grow up on Food Network, I want to assure you that whole he will eat everything that is placed in front of him thing, that whole business, we have a technical term in TV for that. That's called editing. Okay? Let's be careful here. But that is exactly what's going on. Our brains don't know what a vicarious thrill is. And when you watch those shows and absorb all of that energy, your brain thinks, okay, I'm done. I got my cooking fix. I got my come together around the table fix. And you may not know that. That may not be in your conscious mind, but it is very much a part of your subconscious. You're a human being, and human beings come together around food until we don't. Another ripple effect, and we'll talk about that as well. So just trying to put all this in perspective, folks, just trying to understand what happened. We heard a lot of science today that helped us understand that there's been a lot of myth and hooey in all of this discourse over the last 100 years. We finally started to dial this in. It landed, like quite a thud there about 2-3 years now. We've all started to understand the sugar issue and just what a big deal that sugar is. And we had all been buying that hype about the fat thing. And then along came the single biggest marketing opportunity in the history of food. In the history of the world, the single biggest marketing opportunity ever landed with a thud 20 years ago called low fat. And it's no surprise that low fat immediately became high processed, high sugar, and look at us now. The experiment is over, the results are in, you saw them this morning. We're sick. So what are we going to do about it? I think the first thing to do about it is understand that it's not your fault. You're not doing something wrong. You're not making this long series of super bad choices and decisions. What it is who's in there, who you are as a person, the way we're made up physiologically. And as professionals and as influencers, it's important for us to understand that. Because if we demonize and we shame and we look at people as inferior because they're large and we're not part of the solution. We're still part of the problem. We've got to understand the motivations, the true reality behind why these things happen. And that's why you're here today. And that's why I'm taking the time to put this in perspective. This gap between evolution and civilization is extremely real. It's another reason why, this one, Caveman. You can't program a VCR or a computer. You might not even know what that is, but you sure know what Instagram is. Restaurants all over the world know what Instagram is. We're all dealing in our own way with diners getting so caught up in preserving the moment that they're not experiencing the moment. We see this constantly and regularly, and every chef has a different policy on this. Many chefs see it as a necessary part of marketing their restaurants, but other chefs are legitimately upset with the idea that diners are spending half the meal on their phone, not with their guests or the other people at the table. And the food's going cold because we're so busy moving it and getting the light just right and all of it. So, I can see why chefs would lose their minds about that. I mean, how can that be that it's acceptable practice to sit at the table and ignore the person you're with. What the hell is going on? Where did that come from? Well, again, it's all the same thing. We're cavemen. I mean, what caveman doesn't want to be a part of the pack? Social media validates us in a powerful way, in such a powerful way it is no different. It satisfies our innate craving for validation, just like that liquid sugar pipeline pointing at us from Big Food Inc. So, sort of satisfies that inner craving for sugar, for carbohydrates. You just can't get around it. All those shares and likes, and we're also hardwired to preserve memories. That's just part of who we are. It's part of being a human being. Preserve memories. You know, you want to know where you got that awesome fish that time, that perfectly good fishing hole, or, you know, what that one plant that made you sick that time, but then a few weeks later it wasn't so bad, you know, or, you know, that plant that sort of calms down your tummy after you eat the 4-day rotten fish from the old fishing hole. You know, you got to have memories. That's why we develop these memories. It's important. Passing things on. It's important. And that's pretty easy when one tweet can reach millions. So, okay, I'm losing my pages here. All right, let's see. This one was first. then came this one. I'm paying no attention to my slides either. Wait, which one was last? There was one here that was last. Okay, you know, I think I've actually come right down to the wire. I think I've made my point. You know, and I treasure this point. I truly do. It's so easy to get caught up in the minutia of things and all the facts and the data, but then we forget that it's about human beings. And if we can help human beings embrace and understand these things better, then I think it makes us better. And maybe this is why, hey, I put it all on the line, you know, for this. Because, you know, I look, for instance, right now at some of the fascinating things that are going on in this world today, especially right now. There's this wild trend going on in Asia right now. You can make millions of dollars on YouTube by just sitting there and eating your dinner. So people will watch you eat your dinner. And you can make huge bucks doing this. You just set the camera up right in front of you and just eat your dinner. I'm eating my dinner. Okay? What's going on? And what does that have to do with the reason why I couldn't sleep last winter, 3 years ago? What's up? It's all the same thing. So here it is. I think we've got to understand what's going on, and I think we've got to do our very best to influence the people around us. In other words, we've got to put our money where our mouth is. And so 3 years ago, I found myself contemplating one hell of a career change, one hell of a life change. I started as a chef in the 90s on Prince Edward Island, cooking in a restaurant called the Inn at Bay Fortune. I spent 7 years there. I grew up as a chef there, wrote my first book there, first TV show there, learned how to be a fancy, expensive chef there. Carried on with my career. Food media production took over, 47 countries later, 5 times around the world. 3 years ago, I found myself contemplating buying the same place I had cooked in the 90s, the Inn at Bay Fortune on Prince Edward Island. And it's fair to say that after 17 years away, a little bit of water had flowed under that proverbial bridge, and maybe I arrived with a little bit of a better understanding of what food is and where it fits into our culture, and maybe even a little bit more wisdom. And I know that I certainly, somewhere along the line, did the thing that all of us do when we grow up, and not everyone in this room has grown up yet, but many of us have. And there comes a point in life when we grow up, and frankly, we stop giving a damn what other people think about us. And I think that's part of growing up. I'm just saying. I have zero compunction standing here and telling it like it is. Fortunately, I'm not a politician. I am never going to be a politician. You don't get elected telling it like it is. So, a little wisdom, a little water under that bridge, growing up, stop thinking about what people think about you, stop caring, and then quickly behind that, not too far down that road, I think comes craving of authenticity. And not because the clock is ticking or, oh my God, I got gray hair, my kids are growing up, nothing like that. You just grow up and you crave real. Maybe that's why my last Globe Mail best-selling cookbook is called Real Food, Real Good. Maybe, I don't know, maybe. But maybe that's why I decided to make such a seminal life change a few years ago. One of the worst things you could say to me for all these years, I hate being called a celebrity chef. God, I hate that. It is like a dagger in the heart. It is so disrespectful to guys like me that have worked so hard, so long, all over the world, studying, apprenticing, cooking, prepping, all the things that chefs do, only to have it all dismissed as, oh, he's just a pretty face. Maybe it had something to do with that. But maybe it was just that authenticity. And so we looked at this project, and I took the winter to think it through. Is this going to work? Is this what I want to do? And if so, what should we do? Because the place was bankrupt. It needed a dramatic overhaul and a full-blown reboot, top to bottom. And we knew that day one. We knew if we're going to do this project, it's going to have to change. And so the first few ideas came to me pretty quickly. The first one was, hey, let's just grow everything we serve. Let's grow it all. So we have a farm, 8 acres. Last year, more than 320 different things going on that farm. 4 greenhouses, 3 happy pigs, 2 happy farmers, and we grow every single thing we serve. It's a hell of a thing to try, but we do it 144 nights a year. Secondly, let's cook it all with live fire, every single bit of it with live fire. So we built a fire kitchen. Awesome, live fire, blah, blah, blah. Who wouldn't want to go to a restaurant that grows their own vegetables and cooks it with live fire? Big deal, right? You've heard this story before, whatever. It's the last idea that really scared me and kept me up. And I couldn't sleep because of this. Because my last idea was, I don't want to be a restaurant. I want to be, I don't even know what to call it. 3 years later, the best I can come up with is to say food performance. But that sounds so damn pretentious, like it's on a pedestal, and I don't want to be on the pedestal. But there's a point to this. This last bit, I want to serve a feast. I want people to come together at the table. I want it to be like my house. I want to share my values. I want to share the things that I have learned over the last 17 years, And so I want people to sit together, whether they know each other or not, shoulder to shoulder with strangers. We're going to serve a feast, family style, communal, long butcher block tables overlooking Bay Fortune. That's what we're going to do. I can't find a single restaurant in the world that does it that way. I mean, none that I've ever seen. I'm certainly, you do it during harvest or out at the vineyard once in a while, or occasionally it happens, but an entire restaurant devoted to that, there's not a lot of examples out there. So there's no best practices, there's no manual, there's no pilgrimage, you just got to figure it out. And that's why I didn't sleep a whole lot. And it didn't help when the local newspaper published a story the day we signed the deal. Michael and Chaz bought the end of Bay Fortune, they're going to have a farm, there's going to be fire, and they're going to see strangers at long tables all together. And the first phone call that day, the first one, that morning, 10 o'clock that morning, I get this call from this guest who's been coming to the Inn at Bay Fortune for years and years. It's part of our family history. It's part of our celebrations. We love it, and we will never, ever come back. You will ruin it. Strangers, you're out to lunch. 2 days after we opened the door, I started sleeping again. I didn't know why. I knew it was working. I could see that guests were enjoying themselves. They were coming together around the table. It was working. They were happy. They were saying things like, best meal ever. But I didn't know why yet. And it took me a while, maybe that entire first season, before it finally dawned on me, yet another example of how cavemen behave. The bottom line is this, folks. It's not just what we eat. It's not just what we do with what we eat. It's who we eat with, and whether we're eating with other people or not. All of this is part of this conversation. And so when millennials in particular arrive in my restaurant, younger generations, more prone to this than older generations, there is a gap in our society. Millennials don't seem to find the time to come together around food. Certainly not as much as my parents' generation would have. It wasn't something we celebrated when I was a kid. You just did it. It's dinner time. You sit down, eat dinner, shut up, eat your dinner, eat your vegetables. But today, we're drinking the Kool-Aid. We're so busy being busy that we've bought into all these myths. Myth 1, processed food is an option. Processed food is not an option. Where did that myth come from? And how come when I go to the Dietitians of Canada invite me to come and be your guest speaker at the annual convention, this is going back 6-7 years now, And I come and I go early because I want to, learn a thing or two. And I walk around the trade show floor first, and I'm ridiculously disappointed. So here's all these dietitians wandering around the trade show, basically saying, okay, so you're sick because you ate all this processed food, but all this processed food's gonna make you better. This is the stuff you should eat. Are you kidding? And tell me you don't count calories. I know plenty of dietitians that count calories. Now, I'm not calling you out. Please don't misunderstand. But if you think that that industry is somehow perfect, it's as flawed as cooking. It's as flawed as chefs. It's as flawed as all these kids in this school here that come to school to learn how to cook, and it's not unique to George Brown. It's every cooking school in the world. They come to school to learn how to cook food with zero relationship with food in the first place. No understanding of what healthy food is, and somehow think they're immune to it, that it doesn't matter. And the first thing they do after that, they kill it. They knock the duck confit practical right out of the park. They organize the plate. It's beautiful. And they go home and eat Kraft dinner. Where's the gap? How can that be? Well, largely because we haven't necessarily made it that easy for students to learn about nutrition and all of these issues. I mean, you talk to 100 recent graduates of cooking schools in Canada, and they will all say to you, the most boring class I took was nutrition. Now, we're among friends, folks. I am not calling you out. But as I said, I am here to state the facts. So if we're going to change that, then we damn well better figure out a way to make nutrition exciting. And one of the ways to make exciting is for us to help all the students sitting in the back of the room understand this is real. And when you're told that you're the doctors, this is real. Your parents screwed it up. You're left with a flawed food system that will bankrupt this country in 20 years if you don't fix it. Like it or not. Not an option. So are we going to embrace it or not? And if we beat around the bush and we hide behind slides full of figures that nobody can understand, and we forget that we need to go into the classroom and get people excited about this issue, then we fail. Figure it out, folks. We all have a role to play. And I think it's about inspiring kids to want to understand nutrition. And certainly one way to do that is to help you understand how fricked up it is. Like, aren't you angry? I'm looking at the top of the room. Don't you get angry when somebody says to you, look, I buy that can of pop. That can, it's not a can anymore, now it's a 20-ounce bottle. And in that bottle is less than 3 cents worth of ingredients. Less than 3 cents. And what that bottle and that $1.50 you paid for represents, the vast majority of that is marketing dollars to convince you that it's cool to buy the pop. Doesn't that make you angry? You're being taken advantage of. You're being fed a line of bullshit. It's time to get angry and take it seriously. Can you tell I feel strongly about this, kids? All right? I was about to say, don't get me started. Too late. I'm started. As I said, this is about that intersection between cooks and nutrition. And we are so prone to just this torrent of contradictory information. What we don't have in the room today represented, other than because it's what we do, we're lots of moms and dads here, home cooks in general. But you're here wearing a professional hat today. But home cooks are off base now. They don't know which end is up. They're scared. They've been taught that food's difficult, it's hard to make, you gotta go to school, gotta know this, gotta know that. They've been taught that there's this thing in food called perfection. They hear it on Food Network all the time. There was a time when I was guilty of using that word or suggesting. I can think of certain folks out there in my line of work that have built an entire career on this idea that perfection is attainable. And I think it's bullshit. And worse yet, I think it's doing a lot of harm. Because there's already so many issues in society that prevent us from being good home cooks, from just embracing the simplicity of home cooking. And all we need now is for somebody else to come along and say, I'm perfect. That's perfect. Perfect recipe, perfect ingredient, perfect pan, perfect method, perfect whatever, perfect hooey. Let it go. You know, every student in this room knows what you do when you burn a piece of chicken. You flip it over. You move on. You know, whatever. We have got to give home cooks permission to fail. They need to understand that in life, just because something is unknown to us does not mean it's difficult. And when I meet home cooks and they say to me, I can't cook. I can't cook. I can't cook. I say to you, oh, what the hell do you think you are? Who made you so special? 10,000 generations of mankind has been cooking. And the last 3 lost it. And you think you're that special? You can't cook. You may choose not to cook, but you sure can cook. And it's up to us to remind folks how simple that is, to set the bar properly. And man, I know the ethical quandary. I'm standing right on the line. You can see me on Chop Canada every day doing this. You know, I get it. It is a very interesting discourse. But that's the point. We're talking about it. And so I look at my table and I see people enjoying themselves in my restaurant, younger people in particular, and I realize, I wake up, I'm looking at another ripple effect, a table of caveman, because in us is this deep-seated human desire to come together around food. We came together as tribes, as clans, bands, villages, ultimately civilizations because of our need to share and pool resources. It's in us. It has always been in us, except for the last 3 or 4 generations. And then they arrive in a restaurant like mine, and you can see it in their eyes. They come through the doors. They get a little nervous at first. That's my seat, but who is that next to me? You know, and then they sit down. And by the time we get the chowder down, they're relaxing. And by the end of the night, they're dancing on the table, taking pictures together, and getting up and going and making reservations together with their new friends for the same date the next year. In other words, we stumbled onto an unknown, largely unknown, and certainly unmet need in our society. And my challenge to you is to understand and respect that too. That it's not just about slides and numbers. It's about the things that motivate home cooks in particular. What is it that's got us off base? What is it that scares us? What is it that has convinced us that somehow cooking food is hard or even optional? Big Food Inc. bullshit. Somebody please quote me in the media on that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.